Camila Moreno, as Jim has already said, is with us. She's will speak next. She's a lawyer. She's a human rights activist. She's from Brazil, has been working in this field for more than a decade. She flew here from Barcelona in a meeting of the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, where she was looking and discussing biofuels and other issues there. And I last saw Camila before this in Bonn, Germany at the Convention on Biological Diversity of the UN back in May, where she was the spokesperson for civil society organizations in that international forum. So without speaking further, I know that Camila will want to speak about biofuels, certainly, especially from some of the comments made yesterday in the plenary. Oh, and yes, let's leave it at that. So please, Camila.
Well, thanks also for the opportunity to be here and to bring a different perspective from what my government and my country are traveling around trying to build as a consensus. First of all, I come from what we call the Biofuel Republic of Brazil. This map that you are seeing is the official agroenergy plan. It's the most ambitious public policy on agroenergy done in any country in the world so far. According to those figures launched, this is a strategy plan for 2006-2011. Brazil would have 200 million hectares available for agroenergy purposes. Quite a figure, no? So when we discover, because the red means the actual oily culture, soy, sunflower, etc. The blue, which turns into purple. Oh, okay. I'm terrible with this. Okay, but you can see the blue that overlaps with the red and turns purple would be the potential for annual culture, and the green ones would be perennial. That would include jatropha and palm oil. Of course, when social movements and civil society organizations discovered all about those plans, because this was married with a strategy of public financing to establish those plantations. We started to increase the debates and to challenge the government. So in 2007, they went over the figures and said that no, calm down. We have only then maybe 100 million hectares. This week, the official figures that are going to be released, the national zoning plan just for sugarcane is going to allow 37 million hectares more for expansion of sugarcane. If I'm not mistaken, I think that 34 million hectares is the size of Great Britain, just for you to have an idea. So what I want to talk about, and Jim already mentioned, is that all the talk that I heard here yesterday about the technology cannot be detached, cannot be separated from the social context where it's going to be applied. And the social context that I want to refer to you is the territorial dynamics of agribusiness expansion in Brazil. This all has to do with rights, but basically something that may be not familiar, but it's land rights. Brazil has the largest peasant movement in the world. Maybe some of you have heard. It's called the Landless Peasant Movement. That is a part of Via Campesina, which is the world peasant movement. The reason we have that is that we are to become, we have surpassed Argentina as, after the United States, the second largest soy exporter. 60% of our soy comes to China. The other 40 goes to Europe, basically. Our corn production has increased 25% only 1 year, because of U.S. utilized 25% of its corn to produce ethanol. So we have the land to expand that. So we have 21 million hectares of soy, 14 million hectares of corn, 7 million hectares of sugarcane, 7 million hectares of eucalyptus, and it's growing, and I'm not referring here rice, tobacco, orange juice that we export, and tropical fruits. So what's happening is that the population is being squashed in the in the seaside. This is causing big slums problems. We don't have work for those peoples. We have a depeasantization of the countryside. We have an extreme concentration of land. We are talking about clusters for sugarcane production of each one of 500,000 hectares. So it's on a scale with that the environmental impacts are very, very massive. I'm going to try to show visually what you should think of. Okay, now how do I pass this forward? Enter? Okay, this is the map. Somebody referred yesterday that the 91%, actually it's true, of the ethanol and sugarcane production in Brazil, it is in the center and southeastern part. But it's advancing, you know. It's going forward. The traditional sugarcane plantations that are now 500 years old, you know, the first ones, the red dot now, are almost unexpressive in terms of production, but not of course, rights violations. But as you know, sugarcane is not isolated. Here's just some figures saying that we have 17.8 billion liters in 2006-07, and we went up for 22.3 billion in the next year, so 25% in 1 year. Okay. Where is sugarcane expanding? Sugarcane is rightly expanding on that part that I showed you. But what happens is that the cultures that were, the agriculture that was being done that region is going up. And it's going up where? To the Amazon. I know our government has traveled the entire world saying there is no sugar cane in the Amazon. This is half a true. This is, you can see the map, is the yellow is the soy expansion. So in the 70s, in the 80s, 2003. 2003 was when Lula got in power. And since 2003, we had an increase of 40% in Brazil. We have become like this big agricultural exporting country, and our entire foreign policy has been based on what is the agricultural capacity of Brazil and what we can supply the world in commodities, cheap agricultural commodities, now turning to cheap feedstock for energy production. Okay, this is agribusiness, what I'm talking about, what it looks like in Brazil. This is a picture that they are really, the Brazilian Agribusiness Association is very proud of, because they say that neither in the middle U.S., the Corn Belt, they have this kind of capacity. This, for me and for all, like the civil society in Brazil, it looks like an army, a military picture. I don't know how it feels to you, but I would not like to eat what is being produced there, which is in the case, is GMO soy. I'm just going to mention, because I think Matt is going to explore this, but differently from what was said yesterday, we have a consistent coalition that is a decade old now against GMO in Brazil. Just for you to have an idea, Monsanto and Syngenta are public enemies #1 in our country. Syngenta, I don't know how it behaves in the lab when lobbying with you, but in Brazil, it didn't think twice before hiring private militia to keep peasants off their illegal plantations of GMO corn, which was not authorized in Brazil. What ended up in shooting and killing peasant leaders in the last year, and this international campaign against. So the demand in Brazil right now is Syngenta out of Brazil. This is a very huge campaign. You probably didn't hear about that. Well, Monsanto, I could spend like 2 days talking about what are the corruption and the practice that the briberies on politicians, etc., but I won't do it. Okay. This is Amazon. This is clearing in the Amazon to expand soy. And you know, if you push sugarcane, you push, because differently from the bio-bricks, you know, real life, it's really complex and is really interconnected, and everything is organically mingled. So when you push on a technology in this context, you cannot push off the social conflicts that you are provoking. So this, you see, this is clear cut. In the forest, this is virgin Amazon forest. It's really, really tall. There are, I know it's not pictured, indigenous people living in there. Brazil is one of the last remaining countries that we have just about 52 non-contacted indigenous people. This means groups of human beings that are in the middle of the forest and have things, no idea of what's the madness that we are doing out here. But of course, they are being affected by climate change anyhow. Okay, this is a picture of Mato Grosso, which is now a frontier for sugarcane. It's not yet in the Amazon. This is 2005. Those I borrowed from Greenpeace because they can rent planes to take aerial pictures, what we cannot do. Okay, this is also just for you to have a visual sense what we're talking about. So the government, this is probably what they say the legal reserve, that you in Brazil, when you own property, you are allowed to cut clear, but in the south you are obliged by law to keep 20% of the original coverture of the ecosystem or to recover. In the Amazon, this is 80-20, the percentage, but now they are changing. So this is a kind of what they do to show that they are. So this is, you see, this is what we call Photoshop diversity, but in case this is not Photoshop, this is just a protected species that they should. This comes from the traders, websites, because they actually place those pictures to show that this is a protected species, so they are fulfilling with environment. Okay, this is more clear. This is more agribusiness. This is more agribusiness. This is sugarcane. Those are the proud pictures of sugarcane monocultures. Sugarcane. Are you seeing people in those pictures? No. No. No picture. No people. There's people. Brazil has 1 million, an army of 1 million sugarcane cutters. They're all migrant laborers. No rare occurrences, to say the least, of slave labor. They are mainly men from 18 to 25. After that, they are worn out. The average of cutting by hand today is 12 to 15 tons a day with the machete. It's seasonal work. Those are like two women. Those are famous pictures from Sebastião Salgado. And according to international negotiations on sugarcane standard and sustainability criteria that European Union wants to impose, we cannot use more sugarcane cutters. What puts us in the double? How do you say? It's loss. It's not win-win. It's loss. Because what happens? To cut by hand the sugarcane, you have to burn it first. So when you burn to take the straw that is too much and that you don't use, you produce emissions. So what's the point? You are trying to produce a biofuel to exactly reduce the emissions. So they say, no, you can't burn. So you have to mechanize. But once you mechanize, you unemploy 1 million people and all of the families that are dependent. I know it's a terrible job, but right now in Brazil, there is, this is the job that they have. So this is our president negotiates internationally. Okay, you want to have environmental safety, but then you unemploy 1 million people. But as we are seeing how technology is advancing, we see that we cannot burn the straw anymore because the straw is biomass, and biomass is going to be fundamental to the second generation gains. So this is how we are right now. Well, the point that I think it's very interesting for you to reflect is that we are proposing the second generation biofuels and all the use for synthetic biology to produce energy, to reduce, or as I understood, to reduce emissions and to, in the context of international concern on climate change. But it's all dependent on producing feedstocks, and it's all dependent on land taking over and expanding the very same industrial agriculture that is causing the emissions. I don't know if you know, but United States and China lead the world's two largest, polluters, emissioners. Then comes Indonesia, and fourth, Brazil. Indonesia, its emissions are done because of palm oil and because of clearing fire and forest fires to establish palm oil plantations. Okay, and in Brazil, it's to establish the agribusiness. So, what else? Well, I have more, but I think my time is over. I think you can have more questions.
We'll go on to now Jane Corpus, who's Jim's also mentioned, and Camila mentioned her as well. She's also a lawyer. She's also a biochemist from the Philippines. She works at the Tetebe. She's leading much of the work of indigenous peoples, both in terms of the permanent forum of indigenous peoples that address the Biodiversity Convention at the global level, but also in human rights, the United Nations Human Rights Council. She has, again, a long experience in this field that defies her age, and she has a long experience with negotiation when it comes to sorting out negotiations between companies, for example, in terms of access and benefit sharing at the international level in access to biological diversity and genetic resources. So, Jane, if you could join us.
Good morning, everyone. So as Jim and Pat said, I'm here to talk about the socioeconomic impacts that synthetic biology has or might have on indigenous peoples. But since maybe a lot of people here might not be familiar with indigenous peoples, I shall make a short introduction on who indigenous peoples are. Well, there's no international definition of indigenous peoples. However, the most common or the most familiar one would be we are the original occupants of lands that were eventually subdivided into nation states or the countries of the world. So examples would be Native Americans in the U.S. and in Brazil, there are several indigenous groups, the Guarani, Wapichana, Terena, Kaingang. And in the Arctic also, we have what we know as Eskimos, but they feel that this is a derogatory term, so they prefer to be called Inuit, and also the Sami in the Arctic. And in Indonesia, we have the Dayak. In Malaysia, we have the Orang Asli. And in the Philippines, where I come from, we have the Igorot and 110 other ethno-linguistic groups. Now, I would be one of the more privileged indigenous peoples because I was able to study up to molecular biology and law, so I'm now a lawyer. But the reality for a lot of indigenous peoples is that we are some of the most marginalized groups in the world. The population in the world is around 300 million, although those are the official numbers, but we estimate that there would be more, about twice, maybe 600 million in the world. Okay, so we struggle to maintain our social and political systems, traditional systems, and also our traditional livelihoods, and this is the reason why we are marginalized by dominant society. So maintenance of our traditional cultures means that we have a very close relationship with nature. And because of this, we have a number of problems with this new technology, such as synthetic biology now. I will touch on, because we are only limited to 10 minutes, I'll touch on three main topics. That would be how synthetic biology clashes with our the world views of indigenous peoples. Number 2 would be issues surrounding biofuels. And number 3 would be on traditional knowledge and access and benefit sharing. So, since as I said, we have a very close relationship with nature, we have this very holistic world view that makes us very wary of attempts to synthesize, to simplify, and to manipulate organisms because of the possible unintended effects on our ecosystem. So, for example, in genetic engineering, we have plants engineered to have herbicide resistance. Now, the intention there is to make it simple for farmers. They don't have to weed their crops every time. But the unintended effect would be to kill off the beneficial organisms. So this is something that we can feel very keenly as people who live very closely with nature. And also, no matter what molecular biologists say, that life is really not simple. In fact, we're discovering this every day with epigenetic effects, the effects outside of the DNA. Life is cannot be reduced to just DNA. So which is why when indigenous peoples breed or select for certain traits, it's a very long process. It takes centuries. This is something that the indigenous peoples have been doing for centuries, and this is something that synthetic biologists don't like, I know, because we want, what you want is to speed up the process. But then, what we want is for you to be careful about the unintended effects, about upsetting the web of life. Okay, so now, on biofuels, it has been mentioned earlier about the race to produce biofuels resulting in land grabs and land conversion. And this is felt very keenly by indigenous peoples. In order to maintain our traditional livelihoods, we need large tracts of land that are communally owned. And it took a while before the world recognized this right of indigenous peoples. It was only recently, last year, that the UN approved this Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that recognizes that indigenous peoples own the land that they have occupied for since time immemorial. And the problem now is that with the race to produce biofuels, this hard-won right of indigenous peoples is now being in danger of being taken away from us. For example, in Brazil, Camila showed it very, very graphic, very clearly with her pictures. And also in Indonesia, the indigenous peoples are being driven off their land in order to produce crops for biofuels. Also in the Philippines, there is an agreement with the European Union, I think, with other countries, foreign countries, to give 1 million hectares of, which is very small compared to the land we are talking about in Brazil, but to give land that they call marginal land for the production of biofuels. But when you go to these marginal lands, these are indigenous people's lands that indigenous peoples need in order for our culture to survive. So now, instead of producing food, they are producing biofuels. And you might ask, what's the connection with synthetic biology? Any technology that encourages more production of biofuels and thus more land grabs will have a very marginalizing effect on indigenous peoples. So, and my last point would be on traditional knowledge and access and benefit sharing. Now, as I said earlier, we have developed indigenous peoples are pastoralists, are hunters and gatherers. We live very closely with our animals and our plants. And in order to, through the millennia, in order to improve the species, the strains, our plants and animals, we've conducted selective breeding and amassed a rich storehouse of traditional knowledge. And now this is in danger of being pirated from us. We are struggling in the CBD, for example, to get this right recognized, our right to our traditional knowledge and biogenetic resources. And we're slowly getting recognition for this. So a lot of international instruments are being developed to recognize our rights to traditional knowledge and to protect these rights. But now this is in danger of being undone. So, for example, in the negotiations on access and benefit sharing, which I participated in as the representative of indigenous peoples in Germany last May, we're moving closer to developing an international instrument to regulate access to our biogenetic resources and to our traditional knowledge, and to share benefits wherever access has occurred. Now, what we see now with synthetic biology is that there's no more, when our biogenetic resources and traditional knowledge is accessed, there's no more material. We don't have to take the material out of our territories in order to synthesize or to isolate the active compound and to commercialize patent, etc. Now, what happens is there's going to be merely a transfer of data and not a transfer of material. So for us, this might result, or it looks like it's going to result to enhanced biopiracy. So instead of our rights being recognized again, the technology might undo our efforts to get this right, to get our rights recognized. So these are a few of the issues that indigenous peoples are facing. The bottom line is that in order to develop technologies, the technologies that you are developing, it takes a lot of money, a lot of investment. And this has a very marginalizing effect because only those with a lot of money can participate in this kind of development of this kind of technology. So the appeal, therefore, is to keep the marginalized in mind when developing these kinds of technologies that tend to marginalize people further. So I kept within time, I think. So thank you.
Thank you. Neth Dano is also from the Philippines, but she's not here for that reason because she's next door. It's because she's an associate with Third World Network, which is, I think, in the global south, in the context of Asia and Africa and Latin America, and really in the globe, Third World Network is the premier organization in terms of dealing with intergovernmental relations and policy issues in a whole range of areas, certainly around biological diversity. It's been heavily involved in negotiating the famous Cartagena Protocol, the protocol on biosafety related to GMOs. It was a long process of negotiation that she's intimately experienced with. She also, in Third World Network, has also been heavily involved in negotiations around the World Trade Organization and all of its implications for developing countries that Jim referenced at the beginning. Third World Network is really the major source many of us go to for advice as to how those negotiations are proceeding, what the impact would be for specific commodities and for specific countries. Neth also has a long experience, even beyond Third World Network, in working in agriculture and working with farmers' organizations in Asia and around the world. So Neth, if you could speak next.
Thank you, Pat. I'm quite disappointed at Pat's introduction. I thought I got invited here because of me, not because of Third World Network, sorry. But yes, I live next door, but it's just like living in another world. This is first world. I live in a third world just across the channel, up down south of Hong Kong. As Pat said, I've been involved in the movement against genetic engineering. For the past 15 years, in the Philippines, we've worked hard, deep, and wide to raise people's consciousness on genetic engineering, the impacts on people's lives, and also not just working against, but really engaging all sorts of stakeholders in the issue, government, transnationals, the scientists themselves. So it's not that we were just throwing or pelting tomatoes from outside. We were engaging. And the Philippine government and a lot of the stakeholders in this region in Southeast Asia, I think would give us that credit. And as Pat said, like biosafety is one area where TWN has been working hard on at the international level, and we as well in the Philippines has been responsible for a lot of the regulations that most scientists and technologists would hate in genetic engineering. And we witnessed through the years how genetically modified corn has actually flooded a country which is home to the region's strongest movement against genetic engineering. Irony of all ironies. And I think the whole discussion this morning has pointed to us that unlike laboratory experiments, socioeconomic and political impacts of a technology or any technology for that matter cannot be controlled. And I think that's one reason why there are quite few of us here, because a lot of the scientists and technologists who are not here don't want to touch anything that they cannot control. Unfortunately, that's how it is. Technologies and science, for one, technology in particular gets introduced not in a vacuum, but in a society where people are, where factors beyond our imagination play out, and also affects not just people's lives, but social relations as well. And we have seen that in recent history, like we don't have to go that far, like just looking at the Green Revolution, coming from a country which is the home ground of the pilot of Green Revolution in Southeast Asia, living in the Central Plains, the Rice Bowl, of the Philippines is one very good example of how technology, particularly the unintended consequences of a technology, really impact on society and changes society for one. Like we have seen in the Philippines, no, I think there's this running debate on whether the Green Revolution has really benefited developing countries. Like, of course, people will say that yield increase, productivity increase. In terms of statistics, it's hard to contest that. But of course, even the proponents, the CGIAR, ERI in particular, admit that while they succeeded in terms of the statistics in yield and productivity, they actually failed on the unintended consequences. And what are the unintended consequences? One, the environment is the first one. First unintended consequences. Nobody talked about the impacts of pesticides and herbicides on the water systems, on the soil, on the environment in general, until the 70s, when the Green Revolution is way up in this part of the world. And also, a lot of the unintended consequences in terms of social relations. Nobody talked until about the 80s about how the Green Revolution technologies would marginalize women in particular. And statistics upon statistics ERI produced showed that women are the most marginal, have become so marginalized by the technology itself, from the seeds down to the farm machineries that are all designed for men and designed by men. And sadly, statistics barely show that kind of marginalization because statistics are generally gender blind. That's how they show it. And sadly, like in the Philippines, and this is also true across Southeast Asia and South Asia, nobody thought that farmers would be deep into debts that they have to part with their lands in many cases as a result of a technology, the Green Revolution technology, that is supposed to liberate them from poverty. And government statistics even show that farmers have, despite all the agrarian reform programs that have been implemented across Southeast Asia, farmers actually have to part with their land because of the fact that they cannot afford the technology. You may have the land, but you'll have to sell it because you have to buy the inputs, the seeds, all the farm, and in the end, you end up without land. So in my country, for example, one of the most far-reaching impact of the Green Revolution, for example, is the birth of the army of landless agricultural workers, in many cases mobile agricultural workers, who actually go from farm to sell labor, to prepare the land at the land preparation stage, and to do harvesting at the end of the season. So they get paid below minimum wage, definitely. In a country where minimum wage is an illusion, don't talk about minimum wage when you talk about agricultural workers. Those things are unintended consequences that ERI admits they failed miserably. I don't think there's any debate on that. And I think we really have to learn from that history. Of course, before I forget, like the whole expansion of urban poor phenomenon, the urban poor, mega urban poor communities in the Philippines, not just in Metro Manila, has been correlated directly with the Green Revolution. And a lot of social scientists have shown that very close correlation. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, well, what has that got to do with me as a synthetic biologist? Of course, it has a lot to do with us. Sadly, despite the lessons of history, socioeconomic and political consequences are the least and the last things that we talk about whenever we develop and introduce technologies. Definitely, as recent history tells us, socioeconomic political consequences are discussed when the technology is already introduced in society. So we talk about it the least and the last, sadly. But then the impact is really generational. It changes, it transforms society's social relations. So there's no reason for technologists and scientists to avoid this. And it's really sad that at this time, like I remember 10 years ago, I can't forget this anecdote. I was invited in a national scientific conference of people engaged in genetic engineering, and I was supposed to introduce the socioeconomic issues. So I went on like this, and somebody, a known genetic engineer proponent in the Philippines from the university, stood up and said, "You know, Miss Danyo, when I was at the university, I avoided social sciences and political sciences subject like a plague. In fact, in my social science 1 class, I always go to the movies and just show up during the final exam. And now here you go, telling me straight to my face that I have to deal with these problems. What have I got to do with that? And everybody applauded. And I said, God, this is the kind of people that we are facing. And she's a nice person, but really, and she's nice for being so frank. Thank you. And not many people would have that guts, of course, to be that frank. But it's really, really, really sad for us to forget the Gandhi talisman that Jim was talking at the start. You cannot avoid issues like who controls, will it benefit the poor, beyond the ripple effect. Many of us will say, well, it might benefit the poor because of the employment, because of the income they might get by picking up rice straws to feed the mills and all that stuff. But then we've seen decades and decades, centuries of how the ripple effect failed us, failed society. We've seen across history how technological innovations, particularly in agriculture, have marginalized those in the margins and have actually aggravated economic and political inequity in many societies. But while many forget Gandhi's talisman, us in civil society don't forget. We don't forget. And we keep on reminding you at the expense of being called noisy. And in my country, we're called communists. We are even called anti-science and anti-development. That's very sad. But then that's how they want to simplify the whole equation. It's not that simple. And I really hope that the talisman will work this time, that we learn from history and also try to address those issues, not just learning, let it go through your right ear and let it pass and let the society deal with it. There's so much we can do, and I think platforms like this might help if only we'll be much more open. And I think that it's really from history we learned that there is one very disastrous combination that we cannot afford to repeat. And there are two components of that disastrous combination. One are scientists and technologists who don't care about the societal impacts of their technology. And the other component is a society that doesn't care what the technologists and scientists are tinkering about in their laboratories. So I end my talk with that. Thank you.